Let's dive right into this explainer. Today, we're exploring how the American Social Security system evolved from what was originally a pretty simple retirement fund into the massive safety net we all know today. You know, most of us probably think of Social Security as this permanent fixture, right? Something set in stone decades ago. But the truth is, the system was actually built piece by piece over time. And understanding that history, well, it's absolutely crucial for understanding exactly what those deductions on your paycheck are really paying for today.
I love starting with this quote because it just brilliantly hits the nail on the head for our central theme today. Arthur Altmeyer, who was one of the primary architects of the program, he firmly believed that Social Security was designed from the very beginning to be a continuous work in progress. As he put it, Social Security will always be a goal, never a finished thing, because human aspirations are infinitely expandable. It wasn't meant to be frozen in time. It was this evolving framework, built to adapt as the hazards of modern economic life changed.
So here's our roadmap for today. We're going to cover the original 1935 vision, meet the policy pioneers who made it happen, look at the big 1939 family shift, the addition of disability insurance, the rollout of supplemental security income, and finally, look at how this is a system that is genuinely never finished. Okay, starting with Section 1, the original 1935 vision, a contributory baseline. We really have to start right at the foundation here to understand exactly what the original act was, and perhaps more importantly, what it definitely wasn't. The crucial takeaway here is that early on, this was really just a strict money-back savings mechanism focused exclusively on the individual retired worker. That's it. If a worker happened to die before retiring, their estate just received a lump sum payout of exactly what they had paid in, which was only about 3.5% of their wages. This meant widows and children were left completely unprotected against the sudden loss of a breadwinner. Families could quite literally be left entirely destitute overnight. So it was a vital first step for sure, but a very, very limited one. Moving to Section 2, meet the policy pioneers, the architects of the safety net. Now, to understand how the system expanded beyond that basic initial framework, we have to meet the visionaries who viewed that 1935 Act as just the starting line. Frances Perkins was an absolute powerhouse. As the first female cabinet member in U.S. history and FDR's Secretary of Labor, she was really the driving force behind the Committee on Economic Security. Her motivation was crystal clear. As she famously said, "I came to Washington to work for God, FDR, and the millions of forgotten, plain, common working men." She had this rare, incredible ability to take these soaring social ideals and anchor them down into concrete, practical legislation that could actually make it through a skeptical Congress.
And then we have Arthur Altmeyer. He was affectionately known as Mr. Social Security. He was incredibly modest, often using this great self-deprecating humor. He once said, "A successful administrator is about as interesting to the public as cold spinach." But despite that quiet, humble demeanor, he was the master policy craftsman. He ran the Social Security Board for years, instilling this fierce dedication to public service in his staff, and he tirelessly advocated to fill in the gaping holes left by the 1935 legislation.
Which brings us to Section 3, the 1939 family shift, filling the first gaps. Just 4 short years after the original act, we see our first massive expansion. This represents a profound philosophical shift. Look at the contrast here. In 1939, we moved entirely away from just a strict individual savings account model and shifted to a true family social insurance framework. The amendments added supplementary benefits for aged wives, for dependent children, and crucially, for survivors of workers who died prematurely. So suddenly, economic security wasn't just about the lone retired worker anymore. It was about protecting the entire family unit that relied on that worker's income. Real game changer.
But you might be wondering, how do you actually pay for that? Well, the 1939 amendments shifted the math. Instead of looking at a worker's total aggregate lifetime earnings, which meant early retirees in 1940 would literally get practically nothing because they hadn't been in the system very long, they shifted the formula to an average monthly wage. This was a brilliant technical tweak. It instantly boosted benefits for early retirees, making the system viable and genuinely supportive right from day one, rather than forcing people to wait decades to see a usable payout. Of course, they had to balance out this generous new system. So they introduced a legal hurdle, the concept of becoming fully insured. By requiring workers to earn at least $50 across 40 calendar quarters, which is roughly 10 years of work, the insured participants had actually paid into the system over time before unlocking those lifetime family protections. And honestly, what's amazing is that this 40-quarter rule is the exact same threshold you and I have to meet to qualify for Social Security today.
All right, Section 4, adding disability insurance, the 1950s hurdle. With survivors now covered, these policy pioneers set their sights on the next massive missing piece, protecting workers against devastating disabling injuries.
Now, early planners in 1936 were extremely cautious about this. They drafted a notoriously strict standard for disability, defining it as an impairment that continuously renders it impossible for the person to follow any substantial, gainful occupation for the rest of their life. Why so strict? Because they were absolutely terrified of bankrupting the new system by confusing temporary unemployment during the Great Depression with true physical disability. If the definition was too loose, the fear was that anyone out of work might just claim to be disabled.
Because of that fear, it took 2 full decades of fierce political debate to finally make disability insurance a reality. They started super cautiously with a disability freeze in 1952, basically meaning 0 income years caused by a disability wouldn't drag down your overall retirement average. Then, in 1954, there was a huge push for rehabilitation over cash payouts. Finally, in 1956, Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI, narrowly made it through the Senate, but only as a compromise strictly for workers aged 50 and older. It was a really hard-fought battle that laid the foundation for the disability program we have now.
Section 5, Supplemental Security Income, or SSI, and the 1970s welfare expansion. The safety net expanded yet again in the 70s, this time aimed at federalizing adult welfare categories. But things didn't exactly go as planned.
So I want you to consider this question. What happens when policy meets unexpected societal trends? It's a fascinating question because it perfectly illustrates how massive historical shifts can drastically alter the intended path of a government program. The original creators of SSI fully expected it to primarily be a program to pull elderly Social Security recipients out of poverty. But instead of mostly serving the elderly, SSI was rapidly overwhelmed by entirely different demographics. The 1970s saw this massive deinstitutionalization of mental health patients, shifting them out of state hospitals and directly onto federal SSI roles. We also saw a rapid, unexpected rise in child beneficiaries that completely changed the dynamic of the system. It proved a really vital lesson for policymakers. Disability is a highly elastic concept, heavily influenced by broader social and medical trends that planners in Washington simply couldn't predict. And that brings us to Section 6, a system never finished, continuous evolution. Bringing this all into the modern era, we have to look at how these historical lessons apply to the survival of the program itself. We actually owe much of the system's ongoing survival to Commissioner Robert M. Ball. What a lot of people don't realize is that by 1950, public state welfare was actually paying out higher average benefits than Social Security, which seriously threatened to make the whole contributory system completely obsolete. Ball was absolutely instrumental in pushing through the 1950 amendments that drastically raised payouts and expanded coverage. He essentially saved the whole concept of contributory social insurance in America. And he later used that exact same momentum to help develop Medicare in the 1960s, another absolutely critical missing piece of the puzzle. So, keeping Altmaier's words in mind, the system is never truly finished. It was designed to grow and change right alongside us. As our society faces new, unprecedented things, like the gig economy, rapidly changing demographics, and entirely new medical realities, how will Social Security adapt to protect the next generation of American workers? What do you think is the next missing piece? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and honestly, I hope you never look at the deductions on your pay stub the same way again.